Okay, so you'll see the way that I have my SolidWorks set up might be a little bit different than how you guys have yours set up, because we have a variety of different ways that we can, access our commands or our features. I've got little windows that I can drag, or menu bars. So for the most part, when I'm doing the class, what I try to do is always use these commands up here. Couple reasons. One, it's the way your computers are set up. Two, it slows me down a little bit so I don't get going too fast, which means if you can't see, what I'm clicking on, it makes it very difficult. I just realized I don't have my little yellow cursor around my mouse. So what I will do is I'll add that later. And all it does is it helps you to see my mouse a little bit better on the screen. So we've got a variety of different areas that we can go. So much like everything, the first thing we want to do is we've got our files, where we want to create a new one. Now you can create from here a part, an assembly, or a drawing. Kind of self-explanatory. A part, a individual component. Assembly, a series of components comprising of that assembly, and then drawings for that. We will also learn about multi-body modeling, which we'll get into. So for the most intensive purposes, we're going to start with, our screen.
I'm so sorry. Could I stop you for just a second?
Yep.
Can you increase your screen or your icon screen at all? Everything's kind of really small.
Okay, let me pause the recording here. Okay, so now we got our large icons back. So a couple different ways to grab things that you'll see me do it. So we always have to keep in mind that as we look at these, our features, think of these as your solid modeling tools. Like these are your extrudes, your cuts, your lofts, but everything is a solid. There are no surfaces on there. And for the most part, that's what we're going to focus on in this beginning portion. So a sketch and a feature, and two things are needed to create a feature. The first is the sketch, and then a plane to sketch on top of. You'll also see that if you come up here and go insert, you've got additional commands that don't necessarily show up on this top ribbon. Now, how much was explained to you guys about the planes, the origin, and why you want to use that and have that set up?
I believe a little bit. I have not personally worked in SolidWorks for a long time, so I don't remember, but we're all feeling iffy.
Okay. So everything needs a place and space. And the way that I was taught is picture this. If you're having something that's going to sit on top of a counter, then your top plane would be your counter. If you are facing it, then you would start and model it from the front plane, and then that would make the right side. What this allows you to do is to use these planes as references to dimension from, or also to make sure that, hey, if you're going to build it in half, you can mirror it over across that center plane. It gives an orientation a lot of times. So for example, if I say, hey, you need to draw a cube that is 13 inches. You could start it at the 0, 0, 0, which is what this is, X, Y, Z, 0, 0, 0. And you could come in and go to your sketch and draw it in. But now all I'm going to do is I'm going to dimension it. There we're just going to go with millimeters for a second here. But it's not locked in space anywhere. So it can move around. I can do whatever I need to. But if I was to say, hey, it needs to be 120 millimeters above the counter, what we can do is we can then dimension it. Oops. Now the item is locked in. I can't raise it up, I can't move it down, because it knows it always has to be 120 off of there. So that's like having it sitting on a counter. So when we're working on massive assemblies, you know, it's the exact same thing. I have this, and there's an engineering requirement, an actual requirement that this item cannot be higher than 36 inches off of a counter. That's a regulation within a store. So I know at any point I can take a dimension. Oops. Let me get to my master assembly here. From the top plane and measure upwards and get that dimension that I need based off of that setting. So we always want to be able to have something that is sitting in space somewhere. Now, automotive, and some companies that you go to, they'll automatically have something set up for you and tell you. So automotive design, this 000 is the very front center of the axle on all cars. And everything gets measured from that point on. So when it comes time to start measuring things, if someone says, hey, oops. You know, we want this to be a certain dimension. I can always do everything in halves. And I can go 60. So now I know that it is always in centered. Now, if I make that 120, I know the object is centered. So this is what's called fully confined in a sketch. Now, if I'm going to extrude it, you can extrude it either from the center or backwards so that you have that space. So if we just come in here and we go feature and we do extrude, more often than not, the way I like to work is I'm going to extrude it backwards because that's the front face. If I want it to be the center, I could come over and go to the direction and say from the mid plane, and it's going to extrude it from the center in both directions. But I always know when I bring this into an assembly, or if someone says, hey, what's the dimension of that from the countertop? You know exactly where to go. Because it may be that we've got a cutout on the front of this. You know, so someone might say, hey, we need this to be raised up X off of the top of this, so off of the counter. So right now, I have no dimension. So I would want to make sure that I'm using that plane as a dimension. So I could come in here with my sketch and make sure that that is raised off, and I can give it a dimension and say if that's the counter, we're going to snap to that plane. much. Hold on. I now know that that cuts in off that counter. So it's using the planes as references. Does that make sense what I'm trying to explain?
Yeah.
Okay. And I just realized, shoot, hold on a second here. When I messed up my recording, it's not necessarily recording the full screen again. Let me just get that fixed. There we go. Okay. So, SolidWorks, and I think you guys recognize this when you were doing it, is massive on planes. You need a plane to do almost everything until we start getting into what's known as 3D splines and things of that nature. But you can see where everything is, you draw it 2D flat, and then you extrude, you loft, you revolve, but it all starts with the sketch. And one of the things that I'll try to drive into you guys is how important it is to be detailed oriented. You can get away with some sloppy 2D sketches in that in solid modeling, but as we progress and you get into doing lofts and 3D surfaces, the sketches are so important because without a good clean sketch, the commands will fail. How many of you experienced that when you're trying to do a loft and it was telling you there was a problem with your sketch or it wasn't looking quite right?
Yes, a lot of us.
Yeah. More often than not, that comes right back to what the sketch is. And it's one of those things, it compounds. So if there's a small error in your sketch, when you do your command off of that 2D sketch, it becomes more apparent. And as you keep building your model, it gets worse and worse. Something as simple as if I'm building a box and I think that looks like it's centered. Down the road, if it's not quite centered and I want to cut it or mirror it, all of a sudden it's not going to be precise. That's why we always want to make sure that's dead center. And you can see I was pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing I want everybody also to get used to is when we dimension stuff, we can go quick and we can go fast, but there's no point in seeing 121.8 strings. Just make it 121, you know? Make it easier on yourself downstream. Because what I can also do then is I can come in here, and I don't need to do math, because I can go 121 divided by 2, and it gives me my numbers. So it just makes it a lot easier if you go with clean and simple dimensions. You know, where we see 7 digits afterwards, now you're talking about their dimensioning in joules. You know, you're looking at superfine watches, you know, the interior mechanisms and things of that nature. Okay. So one of the things too, I don't know why I'm stuck in millimeters right now, but I'm going to come in. You guys all went through the options and the document properties?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just get to my document properties here. We'll discuss image quality and settings a little bit later. I don't think you guys probably touched on that.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, it's one of those things, if your model doesn't look quite right and you're trying to fix it, this is just, if you have a slower computer, what it does is it just automatically helps it to load faster. So if you were to draw a circle, if I come in here and you can kind of see I've drawn a circle and see how faceted that is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's easier for the computer to generate because it's not trying to make it as smooth. So for people with slower computers, turning that down will help your screen and will help your resolution and your video card keep up. For those of you with faster computers that you want to make sure, well, is that circle a circle? You can come in and the image quality, by turning that up, you see that it shows, visually displays the way it's supposed to be. Even I have to turn that down sometimes if I have really, really large assemblies, just to help my computer move a little bit faster. We don't need to worry about that. So I know, did you guys go through all the dimensioning tools and setting up your dimensions and all that for when you're doing a 2D drawing?
I believe so.
Okay. Did you guys do 2D drawings?
A little bit.
Okay.
I think, well, the end one.
Yeah.
And if it's
If everyone has, make a note of this, if you have access to your 2D drawing, send it to me so I can take a look at those. Just to see, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on 2D drawings if we don't need
there's
to.
a drawing portion that we
What?
had to do. That.
I'm sorry, pardon?
I don't know if the drawing that you're talking about, we did the one at the end of one of the tutorials. Is that what you're talking about?
Any 2D drawing that you did in SolidWorks.
Like it's graphing and stuff like that? Drafting, not grafting, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, drafting, yes. Because I know you guys take a drafting class, and I've seen beautiful pencil drawings, but then sometimes what happens is you guys aren't taught about how to do the dimensioning in SolidWorks, and it kind of looks a little kludgy. So I want to make sure that we cover off on that too. As industrial designers, we don't do full-blown drawings, usually. A lot of times what we do are reference drawings. So length, width, height, or call out, something simple. And it's more if we're handing off models to be made and things of that nature that we want to make a specific call out. Any questions?
Do you want the drawing right now? Do you want
No,
it from all of
just-
us? Do you want it after class?
Yeah, so just make a note of it and then just send it to me after class. Or if you're during class, whenever you want to send it, just so I can take a look at them.
Okay. If we don't have that, is because I don't think I did it on the monitors and not my computer.
Got it. If you don't have it, you don't have it. That's fine.
Okay.
If 80% of the students send me something and it looks pretty good, then I'm going to assume the remaining 20% have decent that. So, and we may just do a quick, simple exercise.
Okay.
Okay. Let me just kill this. Bye-bye. And for some reason, I don't think. No, it's not. Whatever.
If you could just remote. Just scream at it.
Okay. So what we'll do is we'll go through this tutorial first, just so that I can kind of show you a few things, because it's a good thing. It's all about bosses. Now, there are a lot of different things that aren't shown when we do bosses, as well as the radiuses. And I'm not going to necessarily pay 100% attention to this tutorial. We're going to get it to look right. But for the most part, it's about me going through building something that you guys can visually see as a reference. Because what I'll do is I'll have you guys then rebuild this and play with the different features. Okay, because the problem is the tutorial shows you one way to extrude a boss.
Just so you know too, we did do this one. This is the one that I was talking about with the drafting.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay. So then let's use this. I'm still going to use this as an example.
Okay.
Just so that we can show a few different things for the boss extrude command. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yep.
Okay. So if I do something that you're like, hey, what did you do there? Just speak up. So first thing I like to do, and the reason for that is I like a plain white background. I always turn on my planes so that I've got an understanding of where I'm working in space. You know, it's no different than doing a marker rendering. I like to get my desk all set up and ready to go. I look at my component and I determine what is the orientation of that. So if we look here, I automatically look at this and I say, okay, well, I'm going to make this part here the top and it sits flat on the bottom. So that means I'm going to start with this here, and my main plane is going to be the top plane. Again, I want to have things centered because I can see, and this is something that you guys will get used to. I do it in my head. You guys will start practicing this and doing an exercise, because I'll have an object and say, okay, what is your plan? You know, eventually you get that plan right in your head. So if I look at this and I say, what is my plan? I can, look at that. I say, what is my plan? Well, I see a bunch of extrudes. I see a base, a single post. I see a web going in between them, and then a lot of radiuses. And I see a couple through holes. So right off the bat, I think to myself, what am I going to do? I'm going to use boss, or I'm going to use extrudes. I'm going to use cuts. And there's a couple different ways that I could do all these bosses. I could do one and do a pattern and revolve it. Or I could do a sketch with all five, or with one, and revolve that sketch and extrude it. Or I could do, you know, that's 6, and extrude them. So I'm kind of going, okay, what are my different options here that I can do? So that's kind of the plan. And the way I used to do it is I would have a sketch, or I would have my sketch, and I would draw up a plan of attack for that. And I'll get some examples of plans that other students have done, so that you can have a, hey, this is how we look at it. This is what we're thinking about. And the reason you want to do that is so that if you're trying to find buttons, you know, and use the 3D modeling software while trying to figure out how to build it, it just gets to be very complicated. I'm a big proponent of, do you have one problem, or do you have 5 little ones that make one big problem? And how do you attack each one of those little plans, each one of those little problems? And usually by that is breaking out a plan. the plan could go to crap very quickly, and you go back and you say, well, that didn't work, and you try something different. So I'm going to fudge some numbers. So use this as, suggestion as we watch the way to go. And also how I model and why I model is part of the learning. So right off the bat, very first thing I want to select my plane. I'm going to go to my sketch. And I want to use my snaps. So SolidWorks will snap to items. I'm going to come in. Oh. And because I want things to be able to be revolved around, I want to make sure this snaps there. So this is now what's referred to as constraint. The constraint is that the center of this circle is constrained to the origin, which is 0, 0, 0 in space. What's not constrained is the size. So I can make this larger or smaller, but I cannot move it around. And you can see cannot drag, it's fixed. Now, in order to constrain this, I have to give it a dimension. And we'll go with 1 foot. Now, a lot of times you'll see what I do is I don't always put the dimension down right away, because once I have the dimension down, the only way I can adjust it is by double clicking on here and either keying in a number or sliding it with my roller. If I'm doing something where I'm looking at proportions and sizes and I want to does that look big enough? Does it not look big enough? I might not constrain it right away because I want to pull it. And then once I get it to a size that I want, then I'm going to say, hey, that's great. That's what I want. Okay. So first, we've got this. My next command is I'm going to extrude it. Ooh, that's an issue. Now, I'm in the sketch. I can either exit the sketch or I can just hit extrude right off the bat and automatically notices. Now, when we extrude things, we have a variety of things that we can do. Blind is exactly that. It's going to go in one direction for however far you tell it to go. We can do up to vertex, which I'll show you in a little bit here because I don't have a vertex or a point. And we can do a few other things which require you to have another body in there. So once we get a few things in here, I'll show you how to use those. So we're just going to say 0.5. We're going to make a really beefy guy. Okay. Now, a lot of times I save my radiuses to last, and we're going to go over how you put radiuses in. And I'm going to really put a big focus on that because it makes or breaks your model sometimes. So next what we've got is what are we going to build next? Are we going to build this ring or are we going to build this post and then have the rings around it? So I'm going to take the first approach and let's just see. I'm just going to take this first approach and I'm going to put the first hole in the center here. So now, oops, I'm going to come and I can select the top sketch and put a hole in there. I can come in and say, hey, I'm going to do the sketch here. Whoops, I keep doing the wrong thing. I'm going to create a new sketch and I'm going to draw the hole. We'll dimension it. Now, I have a couple options here. I'm going to do my cut. Now, you can see here, by default, it automatically said 0.5 inches. So it automatically is going to cut right through there. So here's a little bit of a catch, and this is the power of the solid modeling. Let's say you come back and say, hey, I want this to be thicker. I don't want this to be 0.5. I want it to be 1 inch, because proportionately, I think it looks better. Well, my cut was only half of an inch off of this face. So what it did is it moved the sketch up half of an inch, and I only told it to cut halfway through. So I run into the fact that that's not a full cut now, which means that what I have to then do is go back and say, okay, let me make that a deeper cut. So it cuts all the way through. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. So another option is if you're making your model and you know that you always want that hole to go all the way through. Instead of doing blind, you can do through all. So what that means is it does a hole and it goes through everything. If I come back and I edit this, it automatically goes through that. Now, if there was something else underneath there, it would still do that. So if I come back, I'm just going to come and do a quick little cheat thing here. My dog is at my feet snoring like there is no tomorrow. So it goes through all of that body. If I was to come back, what I can do, and you can see that it's going to continue to go all the way down and select all the bodies. What I could do though is just say, hey, I just wanted to cut through this face. So instead of through all, I'm going to go up to this surface. So that no matter where this is, it's always up to that surface. I could make this 10 inches tall. It will always go through that surface. So within our commands, you can see that we've got a variety of things that help us downstream. Did you guys go over some of these tools at a little bit of a deeper level like this, or was it very much here's the extrude command?
Yes and no, like some of it.
Okay, no, and that's fine. That's fine. The reason I ask these things is each year, what Thornton teaches is growing a little bit. So I want to make sure that if I'm doing a quick demo or a refresher, that there's value in what I'm showing you guys. If you're sitting here saying, like, you're showing us absolutely everything we've already seen, then I want to make sure, because we can say, oh, well, then we can move on. Okay.
Understood.
So our next option is, what do we want to do with these holes and that? So we have a variety of different things. We could very easily, let me just open something up here. Here, let me do this first. what we could very easily do is draw a 2D sketch of exactly this and then extrude it all. But what happens is, if it gets too complicated, you can't control the individual components and what's going on with that. So if I look at this, how would this get machined? And you can't really say how would it get machined, because it would be machined all as one piece. But if I break it down into its elements, what we can see is there's a post and a full ring. So if I come in and say, well, I'm going to do the ring first, and then I'm going to extrude these posts, and then I can do cutouts of those. So if we're going to come in and we'll go to our sketch. And again, a couple different things that we can do. We can do a sketch this way and put a dimension on it. You could take this outside edge and use offset. So that we've got a command. If I go 1.5. Now, again, the nice thing that I've done is in here, I've created a reference. And again, this is the power of parametrics, which is numeric driven. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to create this. Let's just go. There we go. So, what just happened there? It did not offset it. We're going to offset that. We're going to reverse it, 0.5. There we go. So what I've done is I've now created these two rings. And I've constrained it to this outside edge, and then I've said make it 1/2 inch thick. So I can come in, go to my features, extrude. Now I don't want to go in both directions, so I have to come back and say I'm going to go blind. I just want to go in that one direction, whatever dimension I want it to be. Now, here is something that we will pay attention to down the road. This little feature here says merge results. Did you guys touch base on this one?
No.
Okay. This will be, when we do solid body commands, this will be the biggest thing. So if it's turned on, basically what I'm telling the computer is I'm making this feature. I want it to be attached to this. So I want this to be all one body. So I'm going to hit this, and we've got it there. Over here, you can see it says I have one solid body. So that's all one part. Now, if I come back and I turn merge results off, what I'm saying is, hey, create a new body. And you can now see that I have two separate bodies. This is a quick way when we're doing 3D modeling not to have to create assemblies or to be able to assign different colors to parts and do renderings. But the biggest thing is when all of a sudden you've got one giant body and you want it like 10 different parts, it was that one command. So let's just turn that back on to merge results. We're going to make this 0.75. Now, I'm still not adding radiuses. And it will be a trick. You know, when you're adding radiuses, and even the order of stuff that you do things in, may take you time to figure it out. And you might go and build your model, and then at the end go, why didn't I do this first? Or why didn't I do this way before? And it will be like you just start learning different orders. Now, again, we've got these bosses that we're doing, and the question is where do we want to sketch them from? Do we want to sketch them from this surface? We could say that we want to sketch them from a different surface up top. For the intents and purposes of this, we're going to use this face again. And we're going to come in and we're going to go sketch. Now, what we can do is set it up, and we can see we want it centered on this line in between here. But there's nothing that I can do to grab other than kind of eyeball it. Mm-hmm. So I can do that, but that kind of eyeballs it, and it's not really controlled other than I know it's snapped to that top plane. So what we want to do is create geometry to use. So we're going to create a center line, and then we can just go from there. And I don't know if you can see, but you can kind of see how all of a sudden it says it's tangent. Mm-hmm. Let me hide my planes. So now I've got a line, and by default, it automatically gives me the center of that line. So I can now come in and create my circle. And then we can dimension it. So we now have a single circle, and we need to revolve it, and we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we could take this and do a, oops, am I still on my sketch? Oh, exit on my sketch actually. Come back and edit my sketch. We can do this, and we could come back and we could say, hey, oh, let me come up here, my apologies. I want to do a pattern. And you always got to click. If you see that little icon, I'm going to do a circular pattern, and I'm going to snap on that, go there, and I've got 4. I want 6, and it's automatically set for equal spacing. So there I've got that, and now I can extrude that. And again, we want to make sure we have our merge button on right. So these are now completely controlled by that circle. I can then come in. I want to do the cutouts. So I then have to come in and do another sketch. And for this, what I can do is I'll just do an offset. And then I do another linear pattern. Oh, there, there. We got to get it set to 6. Then we can do our extrude. And the same thing. Ideally, we want to extrude cut up to a surface, just to guarantee that it always goes through. Now, if we look at this and we say, okay, what else do we have to do? We have to start adding radiuses. Well, I have to come in and I can add radiuses to this edge. And you see that it grabs that edge and go around and grab each one of these radiuses. Now, if, and you can see it adds it all up here, if I knew that this inside radius and this outside radius is always going to be the same, instead of grabbing that edge, I could grab that face. And it automatically creates radiuses for whatever face there is. Now, oh, the problem with that is one, it didn't take. The problem with doing that is, if you look at your model and you come back and you say, well, I really want that inside edge to be sharp. Well, now you don't have a choice, because it's one face controls it all. So as you're looking at things and trying to figure out where should things be, you want to break it out. What are going to be, what areas do you want to look good, to look bad? Sorry, that makes no sense. What areas are you going to want to apply radiuses to where you might want it to be a different size? Or, hey, I want this to be nice and round here, so you don't want just one radius on everything. But if we do this, we then still have to come and add radiuses on everything else. And grabbing a face, oops, can give you what you want sometimes. Now, I've got a lot of different radiuses. It looks pretty much like the model that we've got there. Maybe the radiuses aren't, oops. There. Maybe the radiuses aren't quite right. But this was one way of doing it. Mm-hmm. And we got a fair number of clicks and steps. Now, something else that can be done. As you're doing this, and there's no right or wrong way. Sometimes more steps, sometimes less steps. But if we were to scroll back here, you know what? I'm going to okay. So if we were to look at this in a different way and to do less commands, what we could do, I'm just going to delete everything here. Oh. There you go. So we could look at this and say, okay, what's a good way to do this? Or a different way of doing this? Well, I'm going to assume that this post is always going to be the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, instead of adding all those edges, I just want to round this out really quick. because the more clicks you have to do, or the less thinking the software has to do, the easier it is sometimes. So I can come in, and I'm going to edit this. Oops, I don't think I'm in the right one here. There we go. That's what I want.
Oh, shit.
So, because you saw for each one of these ones I extruded, I had to do the exact same commands to each one each time. So what I'm going to do instead, oh, bear with me. There. Why am I getting, there we go. So, I don't know if you guys saw what was happening there. So I've got my sketch selected. And notice how there's nothing showing up?
Yeah.
That's a graphics, SolidWorks has a lot of graphics issues. Especially with my video card, in the sense that my video card is meant for renderings and video games. So it's glitchy. So if something like that shows up, first thing in SolidWorks, grab it. And then it shows it before you start panicking.
Okay.
So I'm going to extrude this. I'm going to then come in. I'm going to do a new sketch. And we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to offset. I'm going to go back, I'm going to do my extrude cut again. And you don't have to go through, like right now it's doing blind and it's automatically going there. I get in the habit of doing it purely because I know that downstream I might change something. So there I've got that, and now I'm going to put on this fillet. We got to make that a little bit smaller. So there, I've got that exact same thing. I'm also going to just quickly toss on this fillet. And this fillet. So what I'm doing is I'm just modeling one of these things. Considerably less clicks. What I'm going to do now, instead of doing a circular pattern, I'm going to take this feature. So imagine you're making a texture. Imagine you are doing a pattern on your design, something, you know. Instead of drawing each and every one of them, you know, in a 2D sketch, what I'm doing is I'm going to take this and I'm going to do a pattern, but this is a solid modeling pattern now. So circular pattern, so it's the exact same thing as if I was in a sketch. It wants to know my direction, so I'm going to click this circle because it automatically finds that circle. And you can see what it's doing right now is it's grabbing that feature that I had, that radius. Well, I don't need 24, I just need 6. And what I need is, I'm going to select the features. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to go, I want the post, I want the cut extrude, and I want those fillets. And then it puts it all in there. And then from there, I've got fewer steps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now,